Hello, and Paola, how are
Ciao,
you?
Linda. It's so good to see you.
It's
It's
so
really,
good to
really
see
such
you
a delight.
again.
In a
Yeah,
few years.
after a few years. Remember, items is fashion modern. It was so nice for me to come to New York to the Fashion Your Council with many interesting people to talk about a topic that was really fashion, but not only. It was more about some items that you collected and that we had to discuss and address in a museum that was actually about architecture and design. So how did you came up with that idea before I present you to my friends? As
Sure.
of course,
Well, I was asked, there was this big success of the Alexander McQueen show at the Met here. And so all the directors of all the museums were like, oh my God, we have to do a fashion show. So I remember that Glenn Lowry, the director of MoMA, spoke to me about it. And I said, I would love to do a show about fashion, but I'm not a fashion expert. I'm a design expert. So if you wish, I can do a design show with fashion as the subject, right? Which is kind of funny to make this precisation, but it makes a difference, right? So I, of course, gathered really knowledgeable authorities like you and some others around the table as my counsel, because I know very well that I didn't know fashion. But I also decided to do an exhibition in which I would talk about items of either clothing or accessories that were important to the world based, based on New York in the past 100 and some years. So from the beginning of the 20th century. So that was a way to talk about fashion, of course, but also to talk about life, to talk about design, and not to pretend that I know the history of fashion, because I don't. But it was a good way to actually not fool anyone and contribute something new also to the world of fashion, hopefully.
and it worked. It worked really.
Thank you.
So you, as an introduction to yourself, you are trained as an architect in Milano, Italian.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
And with a passion for design. Um, you joined the museum in 94.
Yeah.
Yes. And your role is as a museum senior curator in the department architecture, but and design, of course. But you also founded the research and development section. And
That's
that's the
correct.
section that interests us, of course, because there you can dig in some subjects a little bit out of the curating part, is it?
Yes. Well, the R&D department, when people say R&D, you think of a company and you think of engineers that try new products. And instead, for MoMA, the idea of R&D comes from the idea that museums and cultural institutions can become the R&D of society. So I wanted to connect the museum with people's lives, with people's needs, with people's worries. And I wanted to show that you don't come to a museum only to look at art on the wall, but you come to a museum to think also, about death, about injustice, about how to live with dogs. I mean, anything that is about life, right? Is a place, the museum is a place where you can find some support, some help, some inspiration. So what we produce are salons. That's our biggest output. It's half of me because the other half is a curator of architecture and design. It's half of me and another person. And we have at this point organized 45 salons with topics that range from the ones that I mentioned, death, protest, anger, and then also dogs and angels. The last one that we did was about the egg.
The
So,
egg,
see, yeah, the
was
egg, but that
the
was the very
egg. It
last
was
one.
really
I
surprising.
know. I mean, if you look, I tell also all the people that are listening, if you Google MoMA R&D, you'll find all the salons there. They're very neatly packaged so you can listen to each video separately. And
I
every
have them
time,
all here, Paula.
thank you, thank you. Yes.
I
So
printed. Yeah.
That's perfect. So, and
Yeah.
every time we have 4 or 5 speakers that come from very different viewpoints. At least one of the speakers is an artist. So, in this last one, we had Camille Henrot, who's a really interesting French artist that lives between Berlin and New York. And then we have scientists. This time we had a paleontologist, we had a philosopher. So we always have people coming from different viewpoints. And I make an introduction. Then we have videos, since we have no budget, we have videos of other people that we couldn't fly over that send us videos or snippets. So but the beautiful thing is that when people RSVP and say they're coming, we send them a reading list. So it's really nice because people are not obliged to read, but in this day and age, when you give somebody a reading list, it's like a gift, right? They might not read it, but they feel that you've done something nice for them. And everybody comes really prepared and ready to have a conversation. So it's my introduction. Every speaker speaks for 7 minutes, and then we talk with the public. And then there's drinks. Not so good, but cheap wine and so-so snacks, but people stay for a long time because the conversation is good. So these salons make me really happy because they are a way to really reconnect the museum with life and
Yeah.
with people, not only with museum goers, like everybody.
Yeah, but it's an open debate, and I think that MoMA has this. Of course, you initiated this kind of debate, but it's not obvious. It's not an obvious thing to do in a kind of established museum like MoMA. Um, there is a kind of backstage, you have the archives, but you have also that kind of openness on talking about topics who are really actuality and maybe not so evident for people. I was also reading the poetry of Okri. You invited a fashion designer, Grace Wales Bonner.
Yeah, I wish I could say that it was me. It's my colleague Michelle Kuo,
Oh
but
yeah,
I
okay.
really love Grace, and it was wonderful to have her. So we have a series called Artist's Choice. And it's a series whereby we invite artists from the outside world and we ask them to pick from the collection of MoMA to organize a show. And I have to say, Grace's is so beautiful. It's such a gorgeous show, and she really showed a very different side of the collection. So the museum, the museum is going to be 100 years old in
Yes.
1929. So yes, you're right. We have archives, we have a history, we have ups and downs, but you would be amazed looking at the archives and at the history, how closely the museum has followed the history of the world. There's been instances of propaganda, right? When the United States was trying to really spread the word of democracy, some of us have grown up with that radio Voice of America, right?
Yeah.
And it was in Europe, it was very often around. And the same thing was happening also with exhibitions. And similarly, there were exhibitions that talked about other parts of the world. We actually even had a Japanese tea house in the garden that we installed there. And lately, there's been a big move towards opening up this idea of modernism, right? Many people talk about a canon. Well, not anymore. There's not one canon, there are many. And even though we've been really focused on a Eurocentric, modernist, 20th century principle, we're now breaking those principles to understand other parts of the world. And that's an effort that's been going on for I would say 12 years, 15 years at least. For some parts of the world, like Latin America, I would say almost 30. And that's very transformative for the collection. People that come to MoMA now see it. We have curators that know about the rest of the world. We have symposia, we have art. We're really trying hard to open up the collection and the idea of modern.
You always did that, I guess. You have this kind of feeling of international feeling and bringing breaking the borders of Europe. I think you always had that in your vision, is it?
In my personal one, yes, absolutely. And the museum has had it, but it's something that is more inside the DNA, right? It's not about just looking at the rest of the world to try to match the rest of the world to our idea, but rather it's about trying to really understand the world's other ideas and maybe the world's idea of us also, right? So it is, it's not about just an exercise, but it's about really changing from the inside. And I have to say, it's been so, so, so healthy and so exciting for many of the curators, most of the curators, I would say.
Bravo, very good. It's really
Thank you.
no, I mean it's really nice to talk to you. I was also thinking about my tabby shoes.
Yes, your tabby shoes that will go, by the way, will go on display next year for about a year because I have an exhibition in mind that in which they will be central. Mm-hmm.
Is it? You see, I felt it. I felt
Yeah,
something about those tabby
yeah.
shoes. I remember I sent them, I packed them. I was living in Paris and everything was packed to you in the archive. You asked me also to speak on the archive, on the tabby shoes when I was
Yeah.
wearing them and so on. It was a good memory as well. There was also a little bit an excuse to talk to you about archives because of course, the Unarchive project that we are going to launch, there is a first event in January, but only 3 days during PT. We will have more events later. We would love to invite you to Florence for a debate and for an exchange of ideas. But the Unarchive was also in the word itself a contradiction because it's not about archiving, it's about readdressing archives in a more contemporary way, in a more
Right.
dynamic way, because some pieces are lying there for so many years. So my question is, how do you feel about archives and how do you feel about MoMA archives especially?
Archives, I always say they're a responsibility, right? You know, sometimes
Yeah.
when I see when there are designers that come to us saying, I want to gift you my archive, I'm always saying, I don't know if you want to gift me or your archive or if you want me to gift you my life, you know, and my soul, because archives are really a big deal. It's a responsibility. It's a beautiful adventure, but it is ultimately something that becomes in a good way part of the charge and the responsibility of an institution. So I'm always in admiration. There are institutions like the Canadian Centre for Architecture that's been acquiring archives, right? So they are set up for that to happen. Here at MoMA, we have our own archive that has, I don't know how many people that are working full-time on. There's the head of the archives is Michelle Elligot, and she's an amazing archivist and scholar. And then we have very few archives here in the Department of Architecture and Design. We have Mies van der Rohe's archive and Frank Lloyd Wright in condivision with Columbia University here in New York. And that's kind of an odd harking back to the old times of, once again, Eurocentric. But you know,
Yes.
museums have histories. And our archive, you know, there's the archive and there's the warehouse. So when we talk about archive, we always think of a repository of the history of MoMA. So sometimes there are models of architecture that are not in the collection, but rather are in the archive because they are one particular moment, a document, a particular moment in the history of MoMA. And then there's documents of all kinds, including one of my favorite set of documents are the oral histories. In the past, all curators that would retire were asked to make oral histories. So I went through quite a few. And well, one that is most relevant to me, of course, is Emilio Ambas, because he was a curator of architecture and design here. And it always makes me think, I mean, he's still alive and he's still having an influence on this department. But I always think about this categorization that he made of the work of curators. He said that some curators are really caring for the work, curare, and are really conserving the work for posterity. And some others instead are hunter-gatherers. And I always thought of myself, I mean, hunting gathering is very masculine, so it's not me. But I always considered myself a journalist, a reporter, curator, right? So it's almost like hunting gathering, but that's my job, contemporary design. And I like to take this prey or whatever I have the luck and the talent of finding and bringing it back to the audience, right? So I've always identified myself with that. But so that's for the archives. And then there's the warehouse for the collection. So which way would you like to go? Archives or collection?
Both.
Both, okay. Well, so the archives are neatly stored, mostly in our location in Midtown Manhattan, with few exceptions. There's a library that is half in Manhattan and half in Queens, where we have a building, an industrial building that used to be a stapler factory that we bought several years ago as a warehouse, but then we also used as a temporary museum while we were building the new museum here. So now it's there, it's in Long Island City, and part of the library is there, and most of the storage for the collection. So when it comes to the collection, we have some study centers here in Manhattan. We have one for architecture and design, photography, drawings have some, and then we have this big warehouse in Queens. And I just was there last week. So it is pretty amazing. I mean, sometimes I go just to be in the middle of the work because, of course, we have digital catalogs. We don't have all the images that I would like. But when you're there and you're walking through the aisles with all the shelves, etc., you're like, oh mine, I forgot. Like there was this boat propeller engine that I had totally forgotten existed in the collection, right? So they just come back to you. And we're running out of space again. So we bought this factory to consolidate all of the different warehouses because we used to have like 5 or 7 between New Jersey and downtown, etc. And we got this factory to consolidate, and we're already running out of space. So it's a big deal to also think what to do of archives and of collections. And this is maybe what you also wanted to discuss. You know, once we have accumulated all this, how are we going to show it to the world, right? Of course, archives exist not to be displayed all the time, right? Sometimes you make exhibitions, or most of the time it's scholars that ask to see certain documents. But collections in theory are a patrimony that we should show. But at any time, we're only showing about 9% of the collection in the museum. And there are other museums in the world that have storages that you can visit.
Yeah.
But even in that case, you need facilities, you need security, you need, we have to be very practical. You need to have another type of budget. And, museums in the United States, most of them are completely private. So it is about really balancing the budget, and people think that we're super rich. We're doing well because we can keep the lights on all the time, even during the pandemic, but for anybody that has any sense of business, of entrepreneurship, and of how to balance budgets, it's very important to let people understand that we don't get any money from any public institution. So the lights are on because we get ticket sales and retail sales. We have an endowment. So the decision of making visitable storage would not be very viable for us. So it really is about all the time fighting with the desire to acquire more objects, more art, more everything, and the impossibility to show it in its entirety. Maybe we're all hoping that one day there will be some teleportation kind of like device that will allow us to like change exhibitions every day without any expense. I don't know. But in the meantime, it's always a conundrum. What about you? What are you thinking with your project? What are the goals of the project, and what have you discovered so far?
Thank you for that good vision on the two different sides of archiving. For us, it's absolutely not important to have an archive because we don't want to address fashion with the gloves on, with all the rules and with all the distance that there is between a garment and the mannequin also, you know. So it's absolutely not the idea of collecting fashion archive and different pieces, but we want to have some interesting pieces that we can touch, that we can study, that we can even wear or even, and that's why the first event that we are doing in January is about the body. Because look at the body, Paola, all the bodies are different. And actually, all the museum archives show the same, all the different pieces on the same body, because it's the mannequin, you know. So that also is a very contradiction in what we feel in Polimoda, that we can contribute to do it in a different, more dynamic way, touching it, putting it on the floor even, or because the body is so different in different cultures, and we always choose the same mannequin. So there is a lot to discuss about museum archives. It's of course, I was also the director of MoMA, MoMU.
No, you can be the director of MoMA too.
the museum in Antwerp. So those archive pieces are lying there, sometimes forgotten, and it's also in fashion a difficult topic because they get old, they get they lose their techniques, they lose their. So how are we going to do this? Well, differently, in a more dynamic and more dynamic approach, and study, of course, interesting pieces, but also interesting techniques, interesting fabrics, interesting ways how young people address the body for today.
Super interesting. But, you know, by talking about techniques and materials, you make me think of something that is really problematic. You know, some materials are introduced in the world, and we don't really know how they will behave and how they will age. Well, some materials, some foams, some polyurethane foams from the 1960s, especially the self-skinning polyurethane, are crumbling. Like we have these beautiful objects that are literally becoming dust. And we're all trying to think, what do we do? You can't really embed them in acrylic because the acrylic is going to have strange reactions. Then there are other objects that were made with other PVCs, etc., that are melting away. You know, so it really is also the preservation. And this is not only a problem for design, it's a problem also for art, because, you know, artists have started using the weirdest materials. I mean, you can go back to Leonardo da Vinci when he decided to make the Last Supper using, I don't know what he used. It was like the white of the egg. I have no idea, but in such a way that it's so hard to preserve it, right? So artists experiment, and we are like desperately, they don't think, oh, this is going to last for the rest of the history of the world, right? They don't really care, you know, in most cases. And we're like scrambling to try and preserve them. So I think that when it comes to design and fashion, that is also very much so. But the fact that you have a working archive is fascinating, because what you're telling me is that you want students and designers to have access and to touch. And I was thinking of another beautiful archive that I saw in Kyoto. Actually, the archive, the Kyoto Archive, Fashion Archive. I don't remember the exact title, but in that case, instead, it was a lending archive, in that they don't have any institutions to show the objects. All they do is lend, but it is gloves and distance. So that's another type of archive. And I think they exist also in France. There's like the regional funds. And I think also in the Netherlands. So these archives that exist only to make bodies of work accessible to the world. I find that also very interesting.
Yes, we had some archive pieces in Antwerp from Kyoto in an exhibition.
Of
Yeah, I
course.
did. Yeah, yeah. But you know, when you ask for those pieces, they are coming in boxes. They are really an amazing way, but transport costs are
Oh,
enormous.
yes,
You know,
I know.
all those limitations of working with real archives. I know them because it was sometimes frustrating in Antwerp when we did an exhibition to the whole infrastructure behind in asking for a Dior dress, for example. We had one. It was, of course, magic when the box came, when we opened the box, when we saw that. Yeah, I mean, it's tears in your eyes. I mean, it is magic when you have those garments in front of you in a museum. But this is a kind of research lab that we are trying to make, and we are at the beginning. So of course, we have a lot to learn about how to do this, and that's why especially my tabby shoes are a good example. So I'm so happy they are going to see the light next year.
Oh, yes, they will see the light, indeed. Just waiting for the right occasion, and now I have a really good one.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy. So the investment is kind of important topic for all the museums in the world. Investing in archives is quite a lot of is not challenging for the museum management, I guess. And I hope that we can do something together in the future.
I would love
Paola?
it. I know,
Yeah,
always. I'm
yeah,
always
yeah.
ready to work with you. I love working with you.
Because you are attracted to fashion in a way.
I love fashion. I love fashion with a passion. It's just, it's not my expertise, and I'm very respectful of expertise, right? So, fashion is eternally fascinating, because it is an exercise of design with no end. But it is design in that the body is a limitation and a potential, right? So the body is really what makes fashion design and not art. And I prefer design to art.
I found a quote on your introduction of items is fashion modern. It says, clothing constitutes the first interface between us and the world.
It's true. Yeah.
You
I'm glad
said
that I
it.
said something intelligent.
Thank you,
Mhm.
Paola. It was fantastic talking to you.
Thank you,
Thank
Linda.
you.
An honor.
Yeah, I hope to see each other soon.